The wolf was larger than any horse in the garrison yard, and it was lying with its chin on her knee. Sarah did not move. She kept her hands steady on the compress she was tying around the animal's left foreleg, her fingers working the linen in the same unhurried rhythm she had used on the previous 7 patients that morning. Her kit was open beside her on the cobblestones, the salve tin, the suture thread, the strips of clean linen she had boiled the night before in a pot borrowed from the garrison kitchen without asking because the garrison kitchen had been asleep, and there had been no one to ask. The war werewolf was watching her. Its eyes were amber, pale as winter sun, and very old, and they had not left her face since it settled its weight against her. She could hear the silence spreading behind her. The soldiers of Fort Carth did not speak easily. They were border men, most of them, hard-worked and sparing with everything including noise, but the silence that had begun at her back was a particular kind. She had heard it before on her second morning, when a mid-ranked gray had sat beside her water pail and refused to leave until she had finished checking the cut along its shoulder. She had heard it again on the 4th morning, when 3 wolves had been waiting outside the sick room door before she woke. This silence was different in scale, but not in kind. She finished the knot on the compress. She let her left hand rest for a moment on the wolf's enormous head, just at the place where the jaw met the skull, and she felt the slow, tidal exhale of a creature that had been holding its breath against pain for a very long time. "You should have come 3 days ago," she said quietly. Not a rebuke, just the truth, offered without drama to something that could not answer. The werewolf closed its eyes. Sarah began packing her kit. Her name was Sarah Vane. She had been sent to Fort Carth 6 weeks ago as the garrison's medical asine, a title that the official letter from the capital had printed in careful ink, and that the garrison commander, a man called Aldous Wren, had read once and then used as a door wedge. Fort Carth was a working fortress on the northern frontier, and its medics were retired soldiers who knew how to pack wounds and amputate cleanly, and not much else. The capital had sent her because 3 of those medics had died of the same fever that had swept the garrison the previous autumn, and because Sarah Vane was available, held a classification of field healer on her credentials, and no one with a better classification had wanted to come. She had arrived on a gray morning in early winter with a pack of supplies, a second pack of books, and a third smaller kit. She had assembled herself from resources the official supply list did not include. She had introduced herself to Commander Wren, who had looked at her the way people always looked at her through her. Really, the gaze going past her to check whether someone more useful was standing behind, and had been shown to a sick room the size of a large closet, and told the garrison's medical needs were not extensive. That had been 6 weeks ago. She had not argued with Commander Wren. She had unpacked her supplies, organized the sick room, read the garrison medical logs with a focus that kept her up until the gray hours of 3 successive mornings, and then begun the quiet project of making herself necessary. The wolves had found her first. Fort Carth kept a pack 43 wolves of varying rank, including the great werewolf that she was currently lifting her hand from. The pack was not technically her responsibility. It fell under the command structure of the garrison's senior shifters, who reported to the Alpha Kings, second in command, who reported to the Alpha King himself. Pack health was a military matter. Sarah was a medical asine with a closet for a sick room. The first wolf had come to her window on her 6th morning. It was a larynx brown with a thorn cluster buried in its left paw that had been festering for what looked like 2 weeks. She had already been awake. She took it inside, removed the thorns, applied the drawing salve, and sent it away with a clean wrap on the paw. She told no one because there was no one to tell who would have cared. The word spread the way it spreads in packs, not through language, but through something older, a gradient of information that moved from wolf to wolf along channels Sarah did not have a name for. By the end of the 2nd week, the wounded came to her before they went anywhere else. By the end of the 4th week, they came to her instead of anywhere else. She kept records. That was what she had always done. She kept careful records in a ledger she had bought with her own money before leaving the capital black covered with a brass clasp and pages she filled in a small, steady hand. Every animal, every injury, every treatment and outcome, the date and the weather, the specific details of presentation. She recorded the werewolf under its garrison designation, primary garrison asset, Fort Carth, designation W1, and noted the injury. A deep laceration along the left foreg consistent with a wire snare. She recorded the treatment and the date. Then she closed the ledger, set it on the edge of her work, and went to find breakfast. She was eating her porridge at the far end of the kitchen table, the end closest to the door, closest to the exit, the place she always chose when Commander Wren's second came to find her. His name was Dorvath. He was a tall man, dark-haired, with the particular quality of stillness that shifters of middle rank sometimes developed a readiness held so constantly. It had become indistinguishable from calm. He looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. "The Alpha King has sent word," he said. "He arrives the day after tomorrow. He is coming to conduct a review of the garrison's operational readiness." Sarah set down her spoon. "I see. He will also," Dorvath said, "be conducting a review of non-military personnel attached to this garrison." She looked at him. He was not meeting her eyes entirely, which told her something about what he thought was coming. "He received a report," Dorvath said, "from Commander Wren about the pack animals." "About my treatment of the pack animals, you mean?" "About your unauthorized treatment of pack assets." He said it carefully as though the words were not his own. They were not. She could hear Wren in them. The same careful institutional framing that men like Wren used when they needed to make something unremarkable sound like a transgression. The Alpha King takes the health and management of garrison packs very seriously. There are protocols, chain of command. You are a medical Essene, not a pack handler. Sarah picked up her spoon again. "Every wolf I treated came to me," she said. "I turned none of them away." "That," Dorvath said, "may be the precise problem." He left. She finished her porridge, she thought, as she washed her bowl in the cold garrison sink about the Alpha King of the Northern Reaches, Kythvi, seventh of that name, who had held the border territories for 9 years, by force of will and reputation in roughly equal measure. She had never seen him. She knew him by account, precise, unyielding, formal in everything that touched the running of his territories. A man who did not bend procedure, who had, according to the records, conducted 4 court-martials in the past 3 years, all of them for violations of garrison protocol. She thought about the ledger on her worked. She thought about the 43 wolves she had treated, recorded, and sent back to health. She thought about the werewolf, its chin on her knee, its amber eyes closed for the first time in what she suspected was a very long time. She dried her hands and went back to work. The Alpha King arrived at mid-morning on a horse the color of winter ash with 20 riders at his back, and the kind of entrance that did not require announcement, because the fortress seemed to already know. Doors opened, the yard cleared. Soldiers who had been slouching against walls became vertical. Commander Wren was there to meet him, red-faced and formal in a way that suggested he had been practicing his posture since the night before. Sarah watched from the sick room window, which had a good angle on the yard. He was tall. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the title or the reputation, but the simple physical fact of him in a space. He dismounted in one motion, and she noticed the way the soldiers around him recalibrated, the way everyone in the yard oriented toward him slightly without seeming to mean to. His hair was dark, cut short at the sides. His face, at this distance, was difficult to read. He spoke to Commander Wren. She could not hear the words. She watched Wren's face do something complicated. Then the Alpha King looked up at the window where she was standing. She did not move away. She met the look for a moment. His eyes were dark and the distance was real, but not so gupperate that she could not tell he had registered her. Then she went back to the work on her table. She had patience. The court-martial, as Commander Wren had taken to calling it, in the 3 conversations he'd had with Sarah since, was scheduled for the following morning. She would be expected to appear before the Alpha King and his review officers to account for her actions. The charge Wren had prepared, and which she had been given a copy of because regulations required, it described her conduct as unauthorized engagement with restricted garrison assets, circumvention of pack management hierarchy, and potential disruption to operational pack integrity. The language was precise, comprehensive, and completely accurate in every particular capable of being made to sound damning. She read it twice. She set it on the table beside the ledger. She spent the rest of the day and most of the evening with her patients. There were 9 currently in active treatment. 8 wolves and 1 retired garrison hound who had been attached to the fort for 11 years and whose arthritis she had been managing for the past 4 weeks with heat application, a preparation she made from willow bark and dried meadow. The hound's name was Garrison, not a creative name, but a sturdy one, and he slept at the foot of her cot with a faithfulness she had done nothing to discourage. At around the 3 hour past midnight, when the fortress was as quiet as it ever got, she heard something outside the sick room door. She opened it. The werewolf was sitting in the corridor. It was too large for the corridor. It took up most of the width, and the ceiling was only a hand's breadth above the flat of its head. It looked at her with its pale amber eyes and did not move. Sarah looked at it for a moment. Then she opened the door the rest of the way. "Come in then," she said. "But y'all have to be very still. There are patients." The werewolf came in. It moved with improbable care for a creature of that size, stepping around the low pallets with a precision that should not have been possible. Then it lay down across the foot of the room, put its head on its paws, and closed its eyes. Sarah went back to her cot. She lay on her side with her hands folded under her cheek and listened to the sound of the room. The slow breathing of the sleeping wolves, the hound's quieter rhythm, the massive and unexpectedly gentle respiration of the werewolf settling into rest. Whatever happens tomorrow, she thought this happened. This cannot be taken back. She slept. The review chamber was the largest room in Fort Carth that was not the main hall, which was in use for the morning meal. It had a long table down the center, a fire doing its best against the cold, and 4 officers seated in a row at the table's far end. The Alpha King sat at the center. He was not in armor, which surprised her. He wore the deep gray of formal military review, undecorated except for the rank seal at his left shoulder, and he was reading something when she entered. He did not look up immediately. Commander Wren was there too at the side of the room with the expression of a man who had arranged a trap and was waiting for it to close. Sarah carried her ledger. She set it on the table in front of her, not as a gesture, not for effect, but because she had brought it and needed somewhere to put it. She stood with her hands open at her sides and waited. The Alpha King finished reading and looked up. His face was not what she had expected from the accounts. She had expected severity and found instead a particular quality of attention, not aggressive, but absolutely total, taking in everything in its field of regard and giving nothing back until it had finished. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has been thinking about and has now found in front of him. Sarah Vane, he said. His voice was low and level. Medical Asine Fort Cath assigned 6 weeks ago by the Capital Deployment Office. You treated wolves belonging to this garrison's operational pack without authorization from the pack management chain of command. Yes, Commander Wren shifted slightly at the side of the room. She could feel his satisfaction. 41 wolves, the Alpha King said, looking at the document in front of him, then at her in 6 weeks. 43, she said. 2 were treated twice. The second treatments are recorded separately in the ledger. If you want to review the numbers, the Alpha King looked at the ledger. May I? He said. It was not quite a question. She pushed the ledger toward him. He opened it, turning the pages with the careful, deliberate attention of someone who reads reports for a living and knows how to move through a document efficiently. She watched him read. She watched his expression change slightly, not dramatically, not in a way she could have named precisely, but she had learned to read fine differences in still faces, and something was shifting in his. One of the other officers leaned toward him and murmured something. The Alpha King raised a hand slightly, and the officer went quiet. He turned to the entry dated 6 days earlier. He read it fully. He turned to the entry from that morning. The werewolf, the foreleg, the compress, the hour, the specific nature of the laceration. He read that fully too. Then he turned to the back of the ledger where she kept the outcome records, a column for each animal, treated, released, follow-up completed, outcome assessed, 41 entries with a status beside each. 41 entries that said the same thing. He closed the ledger. You treated W1, he said. The garrison werewolf this morning. Yes, W1 has not allowed physical contact from non-desated handlers. In nothing, he paused and looked at Dorvath, who had appeared in the doorway at some point in the past few minutes. What is the current record for contact from a non-desated handler? Dorvath's voice was careful. We would need to check the archive, sir. The fortress records go back approximately 200 years. Within that period, W1 has not permitted non-desated contact from anyone. The full record, the Alpha King said, goes back to the original garrison establishment, 417 years. He was not looking at Sarah when he said this. He was looking at the ledger. The archivist at the Central Command House referenced it in a dispatch 2 years ago. I read it at the time and thought it was a historical curiosity. He looked up. W1 has not permitted physical contact from a non-desated handler in 417 years. The room was quiet. Wren's expression was no longer satisfied. It had become something harder to read. The wolf came to me, Sarah said. I did not approach it. I would not have I know what it is. It was waiting outside my sick room door at approximately 2 hours past midnight. I opened the door because it was very large and I thought the corridor probably wasn't comfortable. The silence extended another few seconds. You opened the door, the Alpha King said, because the corridor wasn't comfortable. It had an injury. Animals with untreated injuries do not sleep well. I have a sick room. It seemed like a straightforward problem. Something moved very briefly across his face, gone too quickly to name. Commander Wren's report, he said, turning to the document beside the ledger, describes your conduct as disruptive to operational pack integrity. He argues that your unauthorized engagement with pack animals has created a dependency that compromises the pack's function within the command hierarchy. He looked up. Do you have a response to that characterization? She thought about it genuinely, which she suspected was not what Wren had expected. The wolves are healthier, she said. The records show it. Before I arrived, the garrison logs record 14 instances of untreated injury over the past 6 months, most of them noted only after they had progressed to a stage where they affected operational performance. In 6 weeks, I have treated 43 animals, none of which reached that stage, and all of which are currently at full operational capability. She paused. If that is disruptive to command hierarchy, then the hierarchy was failing the pack before I arrived, and the pack knew it. Commander Wren made a sound at the side of the room. The Alpha King did not look at him. The pack knew it. The Alpha King repeated. Wolves are not political, Sarah said. They go where the care is. I was not trying to circumvent anything. I was doing what I was sent here to do. She met his eyes steadily. I was just doing it for all the patients I could actually help, not only the ones my title specified. The Alpha King studied her for a long moment. Leave us, he said to the room. Commander Wren did not move immediately. Then he did. The officers filed out. Dorvath lingered briefly at the door, then went. The door closed. 417 years, the Alpha King said, not quite as if he was speaking to her in particular. That figure is exact. The archivist cited the founding record. The first-generation werewolf bonded to the fortress, allowed contact from the founding garrison's healer. That healer died. The bond did not transfer. He turned a page of the ledger, though she suspected he was no longer reading it. W1 has been the same wolf in the way that werewolves are the same wolf across generations. The lineage continuous, the bond carrying forward. For 417 years, it has carried a bond with no living holder. Sarah said nothing. She was listening. My own wolf, he said, has been restless since I arrived. That is not a thing I say lightly or to many people. My wolf is not restless. It is the most controlled aspect of my nature because I have spent considerable effort making it so. He looked up. It has been standing at the edge of my control since this morning, and it has not told me why. I have learned in 9 years to pay attention when it does that. The fire shifted. Cold air moved through a gap somewhere in the old stone. I am not going to court-martial you. He said Wren's report will be filed and closed. You'll receive a formal notation in your record unauthorized engagement with pack assets, and it will not affect your standing. Sarah let out a breath. Thank you, don't thank me yet. His tone was not unkind. I have a question, ask it. The wolf in your sick room this morning. He said, you told it that it should have come 3 days ago. How did you know it had been waiting 3 days? She thought about it. The nature of the injury, the degree of inflammation relative to the likely cause. Wire snares are common on the northern perimeter. The scouts check them irregularly. A laceration from a snare at that depth would have presented differently if it were fresh. She paused. It was also moving very carefully when it came to me. The kind of careful that means a creature has been protecting an injury for a while and has learned where the edges of the pain are. He watched her say this. The quality of his attention did not change. Sit down, he said. It was not a command. It was the closest he apparently came to an invitation. There's a great deal I need to understand about the state of this garrison, and Wren's reports have been incomplete. I believe you have been here 6 weeks, and I believe you have been watching. Sarah sat down across the table from the Alpha King of the Northern Reaches. She folded her hands in front of her. Where would you like me to start? What followed was 3 hours that did not feel like 3 hours. She had expected an interrogation, and received instead a conversation, or the closest thing to one that a man of his particular formation apparently offered. A sequence of precise questions, each building on the answer that preceded it, with occasional silence when he was thinking, and no silence that felt like waiting for her to be less than she was. She told him what she had seen. The garrison's supply chains and their irregularities. The pack's health patterns over 6 weeks, the specific ways Wren's management style had created gaps that the soldiers had learned to work around rather than report. She told it all in the same voice she used with her patients, steady, specific, unembellished, giving the facts their full weight without adding drama they did not need. He listened with his whole attention. He took notes in a hand that was brief and decisive. He asked about the northern perimeter wolves specifically, and she told him what she had observed in 3 of them that suggested a stress response consistent with irregular patrol schedules. He was quiet for a long moment after that. At one point, in the middle of a description of the supply irregularities, she noticed that his wolf was visible, not literally, but in the way a shifter's animal sometimes surfaces at the edges of their stillness. A quality of presence more than human, an additional attention looking out from behind the human face. She did not comment on it. She kept talking. He walked the garrison with her that afternoon. She showed him what she had shown no one, because no one had been interested in the specific details of 6 weeks of careful observation. Things she had written down, and things she had simply held in her mind, because she had no official channel to put them anywhere. He walked beside her through the cold corridors and yards, and the wolves they passed oriented toward her, and she noticed him noticing it. At one point, the Warwer werewolf appeared at the far end of a corridor and walked directly toward them at a pace that should have been alarming and was not. It came to Sarah. It put its great head against her shoulder briefly, then sat back on its hunches and looked at the Alpha King. The Alpha King looked at it for a long moment. Then he put his hand out slowly, hip height, palm up. The werewolf looked at it and looked away. 417 years, he said again quietly. It's not about years, Sarah said. It's about whether you mean it. He turned to look at her. She was looking at the wolf. She had not been trying to say something profound. She had been saying what seemed true. Whether you mean it, he said. Care, she said. They know, animals know. They are very patient with people learning, but they know when someone means it and when someone is going through the motions. She glanced at him. Your wolf knows. I suspect that's why it's been restless. He said nothing for a long time. Stay, he said finally. Not a command, something else. Not as medical as seen. I'll have the classification changed. Garrison Health Officer, full authority over pack health, sick room, and medical supply chain. The reporting structure goes directly through me, not through Ren. That will not make Ren happy. No, he said it won't. Something moved in his expression that was not quite humor, but was adjacent to it. Ren will be reviewed independently. His reports suggest a command style that has certain costs that weren't visible in the summary documents. They are visible now. Sarah looked at the wolf, which was watching something in the middle distance with the serene and ancient patience of a creature that had been waiting a long time for something to happen and was now watching it happen. I'll stay, she said. I have patience, he almost smiled. She saw it at the edge of his mouth. Brief, private, real? Yes, he said. I know. The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing in a border fortress in Middentur was simple, and the addition of an Alpha King conducting a full garrison review made nothing simpler. Ren was removed from command, not dramatically, not in front of the garrison, but through the same institutional process he had tried to use on Sarah. Deployed now with considerably more evidence and a great deal more authority, he left on a gray morning with 2 soldiers and a cart, and the fortress seemed to exhale slightly in his wake. Dorvath was given interim command, which suited him because Dorvath was the kind of man who had been doing the actual work of command for years without the title, and the title fit him without alteration. The Alpha King stayed. He was supposed to stay 5 days. He was still there at the end of the 3rd week, and by then the pretext of the review had been quietly set aside, because there was real work to do, and he was doing it. And Sarah had stopped finding it remarkable that he appeared at her sick room door at odd hours with questions or observations, or occasionally a report he had written, and was using her as a test audience for before sending it to the capital. She had not expected to be a test audience for the Alpha King's reports. She had not expected many things. She had not expected the way he watched her work. Not with predatory attention, not with the kind of looking that needed to be deflected, but with the focused, gathering attention of someone who was learning something and knew it. She would be in the middle of treating a wolf, her hands occupied and her concentration on the task, and she would feel the quality of the room shift and look up, and he would be in the doorway with that total still attention watching her. He never entered the sick room without asking. She told him once it was a courtesy to patients who had not given their consent to additional observers. He said that was reasonable and went on asking every time. She noticed that the wolves relaxed when he was near her, not in the way they relaxed around him alone. He was their Alpha King, and the pack responded to him with the full weight of that designation, but differently, in a way she did not have clinical language for. When she was with him, they settled. The great werewolf, which had returned to the sick room corridor each night for 3 weeks, took to lying in the direct line between them when they were in the same room, as though its presence were completing some circuit that had been open too long. It is placing itself between us, he observed one evening, looking down at the werewolf lying across the width of the command room floor. It is placing itself with us, she corrected. There's a difference. She paused. It is not guarding against something. It is guarding towards something. The direction of its attention is outward, not between us. Though I admit I could be reading it wrong. You're not reading it wrong, he said. He sat on the edge of the table, a posture she had noticed he used only when he was thinking and had stopped performing composure. My wolf is not restless anymore. He said it with the precise, costly honesty she had come to recognize as his version of vulnerability information offered directly without protective framing, because he had decided it was true and did not believe in saying things indirectly when they could be said clearly. The fire, the cold stone walls, the werewolf breathing slowly in the space between them and not between them. It found what it was looking for. He said, I am not a decision. Your wolf makes for you, she said. It was not a rebuke. It was the kind of thing she had learned to say precisely. No, he agreed. You're not. He looked at her steadily. I am asking. The wolf agrees, but I am asking. Those are different things, and I know they are different things. She thought about the 6 weeks before his arrival and the 3 weeks since, and the particular quality of this fortress in the cold winter light, and the fact that she had slept better here than she had slept anywhere in 3 years. She thought about the ledger, which was half full now. She would need another one by spring. Ask properly then, she said. He asked properly. It cost him something to do it. Not the asking itself, but the openness of it, the absence of armor. She had observed enough people in enough unguarded moments to know she was seeing a thing he gave to no one without very deliberate intent. She said yes, not to the wolf, to him. That was not, of course, the end of the complications. The capital had opinions about the appropriate path by which an alpha king of the northern reaches might formalize a permanent partnership. And those opinions involved timelines and procedures and documentation that Sarah found deeply tedious, and that the alpha king found only slightly less tedious, though he had more practice concealing it. There were complications with 2 senior council members who had apparently been cultivating their own candidates for the position of the alpha king's consort, and who received the news of Sarah's selection with the kind of formal civil displeasure that career schemers perfect over generations of court attendance. There were depositions and reviews and one formal challenge that was resolved with a great deal of institutional procedure and zero drama, because Sarah had documentation for everything and had been keeping records since before anyone in the capital had thought to pay her any attention. The ledger, in the end, was part of it. A comprehensive 6-week record of garrison pack health, cross-referenced with Wren's management logs, provided the kind of evidence that spoke for itself. The council members most opposed found their objections had less institutional traction than they had anticipated, possibly because the foundation they had been standing on turned out to be poorly documented and somewhat structurally compromised. The Alpha King presented none of this himself. He was present, and his presence carried its own considerable weight, but the argument was Sarah's, and she made it herself, standing in the council chamber with the ledger open on the table in front of her, speaking in the same clear, unhurried voice she used for everything. The council listened. She walked out of that chamber with the Alpha King at her shoulder and the full authority of her new classification confirmed in writing. So that is what that feels like, she thought. 3 months later, when the worst of the winter had broken and the fortress was beginning the long, muddy process of becoming spring, the Alpha King found her in the sick room early on a Monday morning. She was at the work table with the second ledger open. She had needed it in February, as she'd anticipated making notes on the overnight observations. Garrison the hound was asleep at her feet, his gray muzzle on her left boot. The werewolf was lying across the doorway between the sick room and the corridor, as it usually was in the mornings, occupying most of the available space with the serene indifference of a creature that had decided the doorway was its preferred location, and was not going to be talked out of it. The Alpha King stepped over the werewolf with the practiced economy of a man who had been doing this for 3 months, and had not yet found a better solution. He came to the worked, and set a dispatch on the edge of it without comment, which was how he always left things for her to read, not delivered with explanation, but placed where she would find them, in the same way he had over 3 months begun leaving her small records of his own. A note about a decision he'd made, an observation about something in the northern reports, once a brief and extremely uncharitable opinion on the taste of the fortress kitchen's winter ale, which she had found very funny and had kept. She picked up the dispatch and read it. It was from the capital, the formal record of the council's final ruling, clean, official, and permanent. She set it down. The third ledger will need more pages, she said. The spring survey is going to be extensive. The northern perimeter wolves are showing stress markers that I think will improve with the patrol schedule changes, but I want at least 6 weeks of data before I make a recommendation. You'll have the time, he said. He poured himself a cup of water from the pitcher on the shelf he had learned where it was in the 3rd week, and had never asked permission, which she had decided was appropriate, and stood leaning against the wall beside her, worked with the ease of a man in a room that had become familiar. The Eastern Garrison is asking for a medical assignment. I'm going to tell them I'll send someone in the spring, someone properly trained. Tell them it matters who they send, she said. Not just the credentials, whether the person means it. I'll say exactly that, he said without irony. He meant it. The werewolf shifted in the doorway, making the small rearranging sound of a large animal getting comfortable. Garrison stirred briefly against her boot and went still again. The morning light came through the narrow sick room window at the angle it came through every morning at this hour, falling across the worked, the open ledger, and the dispatch with the council's seal. The Alpha King looked at the werewolf for a moment. The werewolf, ancient and scarred and enormous in the doorway, looked back at him with its pale amber eyes. He put his hand out, hip height, palm up, the same gesture she had watched him make 3 months earlier in the corridor. The war werewolf looked at him. It considered this for a long moment. Then it put its nose against his palm. Sarah looked up from the ledger. He was very still. His face was doing something she recognized because she had seen it before. The controlled expression imperfectly containing something much larger underneath. Something that had been waiting a long time to be confirmed. He lowered his hand slowly. It takes a while, she said quietly. With things that have been waiting a long time, they are not cautious for no reason. You have to let them feel that you mean it over and over until the meaning of it outweighs the waiting. He looked at her. The morning light fell between them. 417 years is a long time, he said. It is, she said, but this morning isn't. She looked back at the ledger, her pen moving. This morning is just this morning. That's the whole point. He sat down across from her. He opened the dispatch she had set aside and began to read it with the attention he brought to all documents, total and unhurried. The werewolf settled back into the doorway. Garrison snored softly against her boot. Outside, the fortress was beginning its day. Boots on cobblestone, the sound of the kitchen, the distant voice of Dorvath reading the morning roster with the careful authority of a man who had grown comfortably into his title, she wrote in the ledger. He read his dispatch. The fire held against the cold. Nobody was looking through anyone. That was new. It had been new since approximately the 6th week, when she had looked up from her work and found him in the doorway asking to come in, and something in her chest had settled into a place that had been waiting to receive it. It was not remarkable anymore. It happened every morning. That was the whole point.